Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the How Are You, abbreviated to Hey Harrow kind of analysis and our webinar, just to start looking at the amazing data that has been gathered. Well, why we allow people to join us, one of the things we'd love you to do is just to answer the poll that should have just popped up on your screen as you join, just to let us know kind of where people are from. Once you've done that, there is another thing I'd love you to do, if it's okay. If you click on the chat function at the bottom of your screen, if you're using a computer, or the side or the top if you're using a tablet, there should be an option called chat. If you click on that for me and just tell us kind of what organization you are from and say hi, just so we can start kind of encouraging conversation, which obviously a lot of tonight is going to be about. So I'm just letting some more people join us. It's great to see. So we've got so far 41% are from the charity and community sector, 21% are from Harrow Council, 12% are from primary schools, 7% are from secondary schools, 15% are from the NHS, and 4% are from other. Hello, everyone. Some of my team are there. Hello, Chris and Glenys. Hey, Rachel. And please use the chat, say hi, so we know who's joining us. While people are ticking those boxes and joining on chat, just to let everyone that is, so you're aware, in case you haven't used the webinar kind of Zoom system before, at the bottom of your screen, next to the chat that you should have found by now, there's also an option called Q&A. Throughout the whole webinar, there'll be different people presenting on from the data to the observations of the data. Please feel free to put your specific questions on that Q&A tab. We will try and do as many as possible, but like we see in most webinars, we can't always do all of them, but we will do our best to try and answer as many as possible. So know that's there. Please use it as we go through the webinar, just so we can kind of get the most out of tonight. Great. Well, I'm gonna stop the poll just because it gives us a nice picture. And if you, Kathy, if you could take me to the first slide so we can just see the agenda for today. So in a minute, I am going to introduce who the team has been that has led the Hey Harrow kind of piece of work on the back, on the kind of strategic team that's made it happen all the way through. We're then going to see the background of where and what that process was to make this possible. We're then going to get the kind of Tabitha who's helped us throughout this whole process and really done amazing at analyzing the data, give an external perspective of what is that data telling us? What is the amazing data kind of showing us? We're then going to also look at from different perspectives, from Young Harrow, from public health, and from the health nurses. What are we seeing? What's caught our eye? And then we're going to talk about next steps. And of course, we are then going to have a final part to do Q&A and a discussion, so that we can encourage people's your perspective on what we're seeing. Well, just to set the scenes, and obviously because this is a whole scale for the whole of Harrow, first of all, before we keep going with the Hey Harrow stuff, I just wanted to introduce Paul Hewitt, just to say a couple of words to kind of set the scene of where we are. So Paul, are you there?
Good afternoon, everyone. Really good to see you, and I'm so pleased that you are interested in hearing what the young people of Harrow have to say. So often there is talk by government and by professionals like ourselves and by parents. There's talk about what children and young people will need as part of their recovery and as part of their ongoing progress after the pandemic. And so often that conversation has the voice of children and young people missing. Well, now's an opportunity to put that right. More than 6,000 young people in Harrow have spoken. They have said what they think, what they need. We will listen, and my undertaking and my pledge is to listen carefully to the voices of young people and to use these findings as part of the plans that we will make together to focus on what's needed for young people and for families within the context of recovering in their education and their well-being over the next 18 months. So we'll have a really strong and powerful evidence base for deciding on the resources and working out the resources that we need to mobilise on behalf of Harrow as a place. So I want to thank our schools in particular for supporting this survey, and obviously support our young people for participating. I'm sure other presenters will want to do that as well, but I think it is right that we give testimony to the contribution of our young people and show respect to what they've said, and we will do that this afternoon by listening carefully to the findings. So thank you very much for joining the call, and I will be here on the panel to respond and to work with you on how we take things forward.
Thank you, Paul. And having the corporate director of People Services show such commitment to children and young people, it is really exciting. So thank you, Paul. Next, we're also going to quickly hear from Carol Furlong, the Director of Public Health. So Carol, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Hi, everybody. A couple of years ago, when we were recommissioning the school nursing and health visiting service, we committed to hearing the voice of young people. And I'm so pleased that we've been able to actually do it in this way and listen to so many young people. It's been a really, really hard 18 months for everybody, and not least for the young people in Harrow. Isolation and pandemic and worries about what's going to happen, not seeing your school friends, you know, it's been really difficult. And I want to thank those 6,000 young people that have taken part for being so open and so honest in telling us what they think and how they feel, because that is really going to influence the way that we work over the coming years. And it also gives us a baseline for looking at how we can see changes as time moves on. So when we do this next time, we'll have a baseline to actually compare with and see, you know, what the difference is. I think it's an amazing piece of work. Thank you to the whole team that have been doing it. But yeah, thank you to the young people, because without you answering it, we wouldn't actually have a clue of what your real needs are. So thank you for your honesty.
Thank you, Carol. Well, if you could just, Kathy, move on one more slide for me. So just so everyone's aware, this is the team that have been meeting weekly for a long period of time to make this possible. So we've obviously got Jonathan and Kathy that are part of the public health team and been working with many kind of services of the council making this happen. Myself and Kerry from Horrow Foundation trying to work with our members. And thank you so much to the organisations, especially in the early stages as we were developing questions and we were developing insight and coming from the This Is Harrow piece of work. Thank you for your involvement. We've got Anne-Marie from kind of CNWL and the school nursing services. So thank you so much to them and, you know, their involvement of partnering with schools and helping schools get involved in this. And of course, Dr. Tabitha Newman, who has been a key part for us to make sure this is a strongest piece of work, but also we're being able to balance it more against other data across the country, which you'll hopefully find really interesting. Thank you for the 27 schools and colleges that partnered with us to make this possible. But that's the team that has been working pretty much weekly to make this happen. But to know more about what actually happened, I'm going to pass over to Jonathan as he just gives you the insight of what that journey has looked like. So Jonathan.
Thanks, Dan, and welcome everyone. Yeah, I know you're desperate to hear the results. I thought we'd just set the scene briefly and give you a bit of the background if you haven't heard it before. So, as Dan said, it's been a really close collaboration between all of us here, but also so many more have fed in to and shared their expertise and fed back to help us make this a much better survey. So it's an online survey for young people aged 9 to 18 who are living or studying in Harrow. There are 4 different versions of the survey that we created, one for Key Stage 2, years 5 and 6, one for Key Stage 3, one for Key Stage 4 and 5, and another for college. It was anonymous. It only took 15 minutes to complete, and that was really important to us. It was mobile friendly, and we made it so it was one of the aims for it to be, you know, easy to complete in tutor time or class time. So as it said, each school received a bespoke link, and it ran then from the 19th of April for 5 weeks. Next slide, please. So it covered 10 main domains that you can see there, all around health and well-being, and included some of the demographic questions as well. There were different questions for the different versions, and in particular, Key Stage 2 didn't include some of the questions about certain risks or the future. Next slide, please. So the drivers for it were from our side in public health, and we have a duty under the Healthy Child Programme as a local authority to carry out health and development reviews, and this is the way most authorities fulfil that together with our school nursing team. Next slide. It is also a refresh, as it were, of the This is Harrow survey, which many of you will remember, is now 3 years old. So it's important that we see, you know, what's changed since then. There are different audiences for the data, and it's been very important for us to think about all of those different audiences and all of you out there, and we're sure that you will all, you know, this is part of the excitement, how we will all use this survey. So schools and colleges, School Nursing Service, Young Horrow Foundation, and the council, and all of you on the call will have your own interest in the different aspects. And now I'll hand over to Kathy.
Hi. So we had 25 schools and 2 colleges that took part in the survey and made this possible. We just want to give like a huge thank you to you all, because we couldn't have had this data without your input, especially when you all had so much else going on with the pandemic and everything. Special thanks and shout out to Harrow College, Cannons High, Park High and Norbury. They helped us think a lot about the practicalities of running the survey. They let us run focus groups with their students and test the survey prior to go live. All the schools and colleges that have taken part have already seen some of, well, their own data. We put a brief data sharing agreement in place with each of them, and we sent them dashboard links to their own responses, so they could see, much like this image on the right, just a quick glance of what the answers to each question were. They've also had Excel spreadsheets with their raw data files. It was really important that we protected the anonymity of the young people that were so open and generous with their answers. So we did redact any free text data answers and demographic data. And we will be sending out bespoke reports for each school, comparing their data to the national picture, the borough picture, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. So it's my job to now take you through some of the data, and I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of background about who answered. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so we had just over 6,000 young people who completed the survey for us from 25 schools and 2 further education colleges in Harrow. And that represents about 25% of all the young people aged between 9 and 18 that are studying in Harrow at the moment. And I've given a breakdown here by primary, secondary and college. So it's about 42% of the primary year 5 and 6 population, about 17% of the secondary years 7 to 12 population, and about 30% of college students that participated. So it's a very significant and representative sample. And again, you know, our thanks go both to the schools and colleges and to the young people for taking the time to complete that. Next slide, please. So we've broken that down just to give you a little bit of an idea of where these young people are living. We did ask, all the questions were optional, but we asked for postcode. About a third provided us with postcode data that was usable. And this is a breakdown of where the responses were placed geographically. So this is where the young people are living in and around Harrow. Okay, next slide, please. So let's have a broad overview of the personal characteristics of our participants. In terms of gender identity, 52% identified as female, 47% as male, and 1% as non-binary. We didn't ask our Key Stage 2, so our primary years 5 and 6, whether they were non-binary. They had an option of male or female, but everybody else, secondary onwards, also had the option of non-binary, and we got a 1% response from overall. In terms of sexual orientation, again, this was a question that was actually only asked to Key Stages 4 and 5 and college students. We had 87% identifying as heterosexual, 9% as bisexual, and 4% as gay or lesbian. We asked young people whether they felt they had additional or special needs, and 8% said yes, they did feel that they had those. 23% were unsure, and the remainder said no. So this is a really nice way of asking young people. So this could be compared obviously to the data that Harrow hold in terms of the schools and the which individuals and the proportion of young people who have got a healthcare plan, education healthcare plan, or are registered as having SEND support. But what we wanted to do was ask the young people what their perception was, and this is the data that we received in response. We also asked young people what ethnic group they felt they were in, and what we found was that the largest represented group was Asian and British Asian, 41%. This is in the table here. We've got 28% identifying as white, 11% as Black or Black British, and we had another 11% that didn't want to choose one of the options and chose other ethnic group. And where they then left further free text data to self-describe, quite often, certainly the most common self-description was Arab or Arabic or derivations thereof. We've got 9% identifying as mixed and dual heritage, and 1% as Chinese. Chinese is a specific ethnic group that is used by Harrow Council. So we replicated exactly the groups, the ethnic groups that are used by the council themselves, so that we could allow direct comparison with other data. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? So as you can see, and I'm sure as you know, Harrow is an ethnically diverse community, but it's not just in terms of ethnic groups. In terms of language, we have 59% who say that English is their first language. They feel that English is their first language. The remainder would feel that English is not their first language. So we were looking at that by ethnic group again, and you can see in the bar graph here on the right-hand side, that's broken into ethnic groups. Those identifying as mixed or dual heritage or Black British are much more likely to be speaking English as their first language, 78%, 76% there, in comparison to Asian and British Asian at 59%, Chinese at 56%. White, about half of white young people in Harrow identify as English being their first language, and then other ethnic group, more of them are speaking a language other than English as their first language. And other common languages we've listed here, but the most common that was listed when we asked people to write down what other languages they spoke at home was Romanian, followed by Arabic, and the others listed here. Romanian and Polish are very commonly associated with those that identified as a white in terms of ethnic group. We also asked young people about their status in the UK. About 83% identified as British citizens, 4% as refugees, and 4% as asylum seekers. And the remainder chose the other option and then had the option to self-describe. And common answers were EU citizen, and there were a few that also wrote pre-settlement. Okay, next slide, please. So I've covered what I hope is a broad example of, or an overview of who we were speaking with through this survey. And what I now want to do is to give you a whistle-stop overview of the key findings. And there's going to be a lot to cover. So don't worry about that. You'll have access to the report after that and a recording of this webinar. But it's really useful, I think, for us to go through and start with this broad overview. And then my colleagues on call are going to look at specific issues leading on from this. Okay. So let's start with food and exercise. So broadly speaking, most of our young Harrow people are eating well and they're exercising regularly. So we've got, 71% are eating breakfast every day, 80% are eating vegetables several times a week or more, 80% are brushing their teeth twice a day, every day with toothpaste. We've got, in terms of consumption of fizzy drinks and fast foods, it's pretty low, once a week or less on average. In terms of unhealthy behaviours, we've got fewer than 7% saying that they currently smoke or drink, and fewer than 3% that say they currently vape or take drugs. And on average, young people say they're doing an hour or more of exercise about four times a week, so 4 days a week. And 8 in 10 rate their physical health as good or excellent, which is a strong result. It is, however, worth mentioning that when compared to national data that was collected pre-pandemic, when young people were asked to rate their physical health before the pandemic, is very similar to our data for the year 7s. But our young people in Harrow in years 9 and 11, particularly the girls, are rating their physical health as slightly lower than those that were asked in terms of the national data set. So that's something to certainly flag and keep an eye on in the future. Okay, next slide, please. Let's have a look then at how the pandemic has affected young people, because certainly that's something that was coming through as a message. For example, a fifth said that they used to attend clubs or gyms that are now closed because of the pandemic. And as a reminder, that's as of April this year. One would hope that those or most of those are now opening, but we can't assume that. And those were certainly, an important source of exercise, socializing, social cohesion, and so it is important to consider what's happening to those and whether or not they're opening up to support young people. In addition, far fewer young people had visited the doctor in the last 12 months than previous national data trends. And perhaps also worryingly, the percentage of young people who felt able to approach a trusted adult at school or college, and also who felt that teachers cared about them as a person, was also lower than data collected nationally and pre-pandemic. And I think the message that I felt came out of this as a whole was that the whole community, schools, colleges, health services, all of us need to ensure that we're reconnecting with young people to regain important trusted connections and ensure that young people feel they're able to approach us if there are concerns or worries that they have in future or at the current time. So there's certainly a concern in my head that there's been a disconnect, and that social cohesion and those links to trusted adults need to be shored up. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's have a look at the home and family groups. Well, 90% of people we asked live at in a home with their mum, 75% with dad, and about up to 10% are also living with another family or non-family member. So it's most commonly grandmother, but it could be granddad, and it could also be aunts and uncles were pretty common. So there can be a number of individuals and different relatives and some non-relatives in the household. And about 86% of the young people that we asked said that they eat meals with their family several times a week or more. So I did get a picture of, you know, quite a household in which, you know, people are regularly sitting around the table, intergenerationally, people are sitting around the table eating regularly together and meeting regularly. And so that kind of feeling of kind of family cohesion came through in terms of things like over 80% of young people, this third bullet point here, agreed that their family helps and supports them, and that their parents or carers are interested in what happens to them at school or college. Only about 6 in 10 said that they had their own bedroom. The rest were sharing, almost certainly with a sibling. Slightly, well, very worryingly, 2% said that they didn't have a bedroom at all. And that 2% was consistent across the age group. So Key Stage 2, 3, 4 and 5 and college, there were 2% of individuals who said they didn't have a bedroom. And that's certainly, you know, of concern. And a fifth said that they lived with someone with either a health or a mental health condition. Okay. So let's have a little look about feeling unsafe in and around Harrow. About 40% of people, 4 in 10, said that there are areas of Harrow where they felt unsafe. When asked to provide details about where they felt unsafe in Harrow, they often mentioned Harrow on the Hill train station, Wealdstone or Harrow Weald, as well as places that are not busy, you know, like alleyways and parks and that kind of thing. And about 7% said that they don't feel safe in the area where they live. And I also wanted to flag some sexual harassment data that we collected in terms of feeling unsafe. And when we split that by gender, we found that 28% of non-binary individuals, 19% of female individuals, and 7% of male individuals agreed that they felt they had experienced sexual harassment. So certainly, again, you know, this is something, as we all know, has been in the press. And so we asked that question, and what we're finding is not only is there certainly a reasonably large number of people who feel that they have experienced this, but that there are gender differences. Okay, next slide, please. One of the very strong results that came out of the data as well is that young people, a number of young people, overall 12% of young people are saying that they worry that they or their family might run out of food because of lack of money or other resources. Now, this is a question that we had heard a number of people nationally and internationally had met and considered that this is a really important question that should be asked to young people. And the Hey Harrow survey, to our knowledge, is the first time that this has been put to young people. We were surprised by the results. I mean, you know, 12% is high. It's about 10% across Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 and 5, and it's higher in college students at about 18%. And when we compared this feeling of food insecurity between ethnic groups, we found that those identifying as Black or Black British and those identifying, excuse me, with sirens, I hope they're not coming to me, those identifying as Black British, as Chinese, as mixed or dual heritage, or as other ethnic group, were more likely to be the ones who said that they were worrying about food insecurity. I also wanted to have a look at what other questions associated with this food insecurity worry, and what we found, and it's certainly, I think, an area, an avenue of analysis we want to continue looking at in more detail, but initial analysis revealed that worrying about food insecurity is associated with lower rates of toothbrushing, with not getting enough sleep, with not eating breakfast regularly, with a lower feeling of physical healthiness, and with a much higher electronic device and internet use at weekends. So there are certainly some interesting trends coming out in terms not only of the proportion of people who worry about food, but also what that associates with on a broader scale. Okay, next slide, please. So young people, we asked the older cohort, so Key Stages 4 and 5 and college students, what worried them. We asked everyone what worried them, but a very strong result was in terms of worrying about the future for this older group of youth. In fact, only half said that they felt optimistic about their future. And we had a free text comment box and we asked people, you know, what is it that you worry about? And it was such a strong response to get a number of people, you know, a lot of young people saying we're fearing failure, essentially. And it was very often relating to exams and schoolwork, maybe also to do with associated pressure from parents. And this fear of failure is something that we also observed as a national data response in the Children's Society's Good Childhood report that was published a few months ago. And I've put the link in here for anyone that wants to go and look at that in more detail. But I think that what we realized was that this real fear of failure is something that needs our support. I've put some quotes here as representative quotes from young people. And that learning to cope is important. You know, how can we all support young people to learn to cope in the society under the current pressures that they have to face? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so young people use electronic devices and the internet a lot. On weekdays, about a third are on devices at least 4 hours a day. At weekends, just over half are on devices for at least 4 hours a day. And about 40% agreed that they're using devices, electronic devices and access to the internet to escape the real world. That was a statement we put in and we said, how much do you agree with that statement? So about 40% agreed with that. And perhaps, I mean, we're all using electronic devices a lot, or the vast majority of us. So I'm not, I don't want everyone to be phenomenally, you know, shocked and horrified, and I'm sure you're not. But in terms of good practice and knowing when to put things down, you know, this is something that we can support young people to know how to do better. It is, for example, a concern that a fifth of young people say that their electronic devices sometimes wake them up when they're asleep, and that is not good sleep hygiene in terms of having electronic devices near the bed. And perhaps even more worryingly, those who are using electronic devices and the internet for very long periods, so 6+ hours a day, are more likely, statistically more likely, to say that they feel physically unhealthy. So there's certainly some concerns about very excessive use of electronic devices. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a look at school. So about 80% say that they like school or college, either a bit or a lot, which is, you know, I think a pretty strong result. However, that said, there are really clear differences between the key stage groups. So, you know, 35% of key stage 4 and 5 young people say they don't like school. And that's in comparison to only 12% of those in college who say they don't like it, and 26% in key stage 3 and 11% in key stage 2. So certainly a feeling of not liking school is happening most often in our key stage 4 and 5 students. About 68% of our young people agreed that school or college teaches them how to stay physically and mentally healthy. And again, perhaps worryingly and associated with some of the things that I said earlier about the pandemic, only half agree that most teachers care about us as a person. So they were asked, did they agree with this statement? Most teachers care about us as a person. Only about half agree. And this is definitely lower than the national data pre-pandemic. And I've given you an example here in terms of year 7, crucial year when they will have been transitioning from primary to secondary. And what we're finding is when we compare Harrow versus national data, only 54% of boys felt that teachers cared about them as a person in Harrow versus 76% of the national pre-pandemic data. And similarly with girls, only 44% agreed that most teachers care about them as a person in comparison to 79% of girls pre-pandemic. So again, some concerning trends that carry on with this suggestion that the pandemic may have broken some important bonds between young people and schools. Not broken, reduced. Okay, next slide, please. We went on to have a look at bullying. And what we found, both from the closed questions and from the comments data that we got, was that most often young people were talking about times they'd been bullied when they were the age of being either in primary school or the start of secondary school. That seemed to be when the majority of bullying had happened or was happening in their lives. And 11% said they had been bullied in the last few months, and 3% said that they had taken part in bullying someone else in the last few months. These are much lower than national data trends pre-pandemic, and it might be that that is due to young people not getting out as much. Nonetheless, when we looked at what bullying was about, what we found from the free text comments was that it was perhaps unsurprisingly very much to do with something that's physically noticeably different about you. So ethnicity and body shape were very common themes. As the young people got a bit older and got into key stages 4 and 5, bullying tended to be, it was more often about things like gender orientation or sexual orientation. And bullying, young people told us, was happening at school. That was probably one of the most often. And what was particularly interesting, especially for me, I've been a governor of a large primary for 9 years now. And we often ask questions in our school, in the classroom, and the teachers get concerned. They think, well, we've got these really good bonds, we feel, with our young people, and we're teaching them PHSE, which really connects, and we feel that they can trust us. So why, when we ask them these, and these are ONS standard Office of National Statistics style questions, or young people questions, you know, do you feel that we care? Sometimes we're getting these kinds of responses. Some of them you've seen here, you know, we don't feel cared about. Well, one of the things we started looking at here and realizing is that a lot of these incidents are happening outside of lesson time, and that sometimes there was perhaps a lack of awareness or understanding by the adults that are entrusted with supervision during lunch and break times. So whilst those young people might be finding a cohesive relationship with their teachers when they're in the playground and break time, some of them may not feel supported. And there's a very good representative quote from a young girl here who's a primary school, and at primary school, this is what she said: you know, I'm female. I had many days when me and my friends were being chased. The boys were trying to touch us in places they shouldn't be touching us, and when we tried to say what was happening, they just said, oh, they're just trying to play tag. Now, I can't tell you whether the teachers that this young girl has said are teachers or whether they're playground assistants, but it's happening in the playground. And I think this is something that we need to consider, is the messages that are happening in class and the safety and safeguarding that's happening outside of class. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you all. I hope, I know I've been talking. I promise I've only got 4 slides left, and then I'll hand over. I did want to add in a slide quickly about the ambitions of these young people, because especially the older youth, so our key stage 4+, you know, these are people who are there right now, and they're so keen to want to do something. And I really, really hope that we can all work together to facilitate that. And I was really interested to see how many in the free text comments, when we asked them what they wanted to do, how many gave quite altruistic answers. They were talking about wanting to be entrepreneurial but help others as well. I thought this was a fantastic thing to see, you know, and I've given again some quotes here that are representative of that. Owning a business was a common theme, as were the professions of things like engineering, health professions, IT related jobs. So there's loads and loads of enthusiasm there. However, and that said, you know, only 33% agreed that they'd been able to carry out work experience in an area that interested them. Again, an area that doubtless the pandemic has definitely impacted on. And only 39% said that they'd found someone that could offer them careers advice that was relevant to their interests. So again, there's opportunities there. Next slide, please. Okay. I also wanted to just flag up 2 groups with the caveat that these are very small sample sizes. So in both of these cases, about 50 individuals in our sample. Nonetheless, across all the analysis, they were 2 groups of people who were clearly really struggling. The first were those who are identifying as non-binary. It's about 1%, as we saw at the top of the slides. And these young people across the board were much, who are unhappy, turbulent, far lower life satisfaction scores. They were being bullied more. They were bullying others more. They had very negative opinions of body image. Not all of them, but certainly a significantly more than the other genders. They were also more likely to be involved in some of the risky behaviours we were looking at. And as a separate group, when we were looking at by ethnic group, those who are identifying as Chinese were also noticeably less happy, less comfortable. They had lower life satisfaction scores. They were more worried, much more worried for their safety outside the home. They were less likely to have a quiet place to study at home, and they were less likely to have visited the dentist or the GP in the last 12 months. And they were also doing less exercise and more likely to be bullying others and being bullied. So those are two groups that they're small numbers of people, but who are currently really quite often in very turbulent situations, and perhaps want to look out for these two groups and to see whether or not they require support. I'm going to end with a couple of slides that focus on some multivariate analysis that I carried out. Now, what we try and do here when we carry out multivariate analysis is that we're saying, okay, what questions that we've asked predict our central sort of focus question. So in this slide, my focus was what questions are predicting a feeling of being physically healthy. And what I found was that the predictors of feeling physically healthy were being physically active more during the week, eating regular family meals, getting enough sleep to feel rested, eating breakfast daily, not worrying about family food insecurity, daily teeth brushing, and not using electronic devices excessively on weekends. So those questions were significant predictors of whether or not a young person felt physically healthy. Now, my third bullet point here is super important. We shouldn't and cannot assume causation. These questions that we ask may be indicators for other things. And we absolutely, in terms of feeling physically healthy, mustn't assume that's the same as being medically healthy. But nonetheless, it's super useful to have a look at which of these factors are associating with feeling physically well. And finally, I also looked at well-being. Now, the Office of National Statistics and many other national and international European groups use life satisfaction scores as an indicator, top-level indicator of well-being. And what we certainly found with our data when we replicated that question is that there was a very clear and significant correlation between feeling physically well and being mentally well in terms of higher life satisfaction, which does just underline again the importance of considering the two together when you're thinking about well-being. And when we looked at what questions predicted higher life satisfaction, well, we found some interesting findings, I think, that third bullet there. So yes, we found things that you would imagine are in the stable of well-being. So feeling happy yesterday, feeling loved, liking the way you look, feeling down and depressed less often than average, feeling physically healthy. But there were also really interesting things that correlate or that predicted high life satisfaction, such as feeling able to talk to your family about problems and liking school, and not worrying about food insecurity has come in there again. Those individuals, are definitely showing a lower life satisfaction. Feeling safe in the area that you live, and not being non-binary in terms of gender identification. Those were certainly questions that successfully and statistically predicted higher life satisfaction. There was also one other one that I've pulled into a separate bullet at the end here, which was our resilience marker, if you like. So we asked young people, do you agree that you are able to cope when life gets tricky? And this was our kind of resilience indicator. And what we found was that also was a significant predictor of higher life satisfaction scores. So again, this piece across the slides that I've presented about getting support to cope when life gets tricky is certainly something we should be supporting our young people to do going forwards. So thank you all so much for bearing with me. I know there are a lot of slides there. I'm now going to hand over to Jonathan. I hope you you found those interesting. And now what my colleagues are going to do is just to have a look in a little bit more detail about some specifics that caught their eye. Jonathan.
I think it's Kerry actually, but
Kerry.
And just so everyone's aware, if you've not found it yet, please use the Q&A either for questions that Tabitha might answer when we get to that point, or as we go through these kind of core OI data, please use that Q&A option. So Kerry, are you there to look?
I'm here, yeah. Hi everyone. So yeah, these aren't just stats that caught our eye. We've sort of divvied it up through the different organisations involved, but just to say that really this is a collective kind of effort to look at the results, and we've been discussing these, over the last sort of couple of weeks. So just to, if I can go into the slide, where we sort of came at this from Young Harrow Foundation was, we ran that needs analysis back in 2018, and we really found that there were 5 core areas that young people were saying that they need help with. And so we looked at that really in relation to this. It was interesting to see that some of those same patterns were still there, and it was interesting to compare. So we started off with mental health. That was probably back in 2018 the biggest area that young people were telling us we need more support in, and probably unsurprisingly it remains a really important area and need for young people. So if I just whip through these stats, and I think some of them will be repeating from what you've heard already, but so an overall stat here is 65% of the young people, so that's 65% of just over 6,000 young people have said that they sometimes or often feel depressed or anxious. So we wanted to look a little bit deeper into that, and there's lots more work to be done here, right? You guys will get the report and you'll see it's there's so much data, it's so rich, we'll be able to get lots out of it. So we've started that process of trying to understand it a little bit better. So going into that second bullet point there, overall 19% of young people often felt nervous or anxious. Now that stat was lowest among Key Stage 2 students, and it was highest in Key Stage 4 and 5. And so we just wanted to take a sort of deeper look then at Key Stage 4 and 5. That was sort of raising some flags. And if you look at that group, in fact, nearly 30% of those young people said that they often feel nervous or anxious, and 24%, so that's nearly 1 in 5 of them, said that they often feel depressed. So it's really clear from the data, just at this point, that this group are struggling. This group are struggling, and collectively we can look together at how we action that. Tabitha has mentioned here that a lot of the young people across the board are talking about fear of failure, so that's a big worry for them, particularly relating to schoolwork and judgment from others. And that's interesting to see. That's actually in line with nationally the concerns of young people, and you can check that out if you. It's definitely worth having a read of this Good Childhood report as well from 2020. And just building on that resilient point as well, which Tabitha mentioned. So half of young people said that they agreed that they could cope with life when it ggets tricky. 38 were actually neutral. They answered neutral to that, which was interesting. And 12% disagreed. They disagreed with that statement that they could cope. And this was relatively consistent across the age groups. And it obviously highlights that there's definitely more understanding to happen around that concept of resilience. Back in 2018, in fact, 36% of young people actually said that they specifically wanted support with dealing with stressful situations. So it certainly remains an issue. The anxieties, the sort of the problems that young people encounter can't all be taken away. So it's, you know, it will be really interesting to look at how we help young people to build up the feeling of resilience moving forward. And just finally, it's in the report itself, you can see a lot more around friendships and support networks, but just to pull out a stat here. So 82% said that they agree that they have a really good friend or friends. 14% were neutral and 4% disagreed. And in fact, when you take a closer look, the group most likely to disagree by age were that key stage 4 and 5. So again, it just kind of, reinforces that sort of notion that that age group particularly might be struggling. Next slide, please. And the second area here, we've looked at safety. Now, in the needs analysis, this is how back in 2018, youth violence as a kind of specific topic came out of that. And it really was the second area that young people, you know, said that they want support with. And we're certainly seeing that continue, but we're seeing some other topics here, and we think, you know, specifically asked questions as well around not only violence but risky behaviour and exploitation. And there are some stats here that are worth sort of flagging and highlighting. So 4 in 10, Tabitha's already mentioned, 4 in 10 say that there are areas of Harrow, their own borough, that they feel unsafe visiting, and you know, helpfully we have these hotspots that they have mentioned that will be helpful in sort of in people working together to deliver responses. This second stat was really quite shocking, actually, and I'm sure you'll all agree, but 2% of the young people answered that they don't feel safe at home. So 2% of our young people don't feel safe at home, and 10% said that they only feel safe at home some of the time. Now that definitely, I'm sure you'll agree, we want to do a lot more work on this over the coming months to understand that better, to have conversations with young people, but that's certainly something that we want to look at moving forward. Nearly a fifth said that they've been in some sort of physical fight in the last 12 months, and a third have watched somebody get physically hurt by someone else. So there's certainly an issue with violence, and we saw actually this coming out in 2018 in terms of I think it was about 14% of young people in the This Is Harrow report actually specifically called for support for youth violence, not getting into fights, that kind of stuff. So it's interesting to see that sort of coming out again here too. Touching on the bullying stat, which Tabitha has mentioned as well, so 11% across the board have said that they have experienced being bullied. And then if you look at it by age group, key stage 2, in fact, were the most likely to have answered yes to that. So 12 goes above the average of 12.9% answered yes in key stage 2. 13% have experienced sexual harassment. And if they've identified as female or non-binary, they're more likely to have said they feel they've experienced that. If they're in key stages 3, 4, or 5, about 3% said that they've been involved in gang activities. So that's a helpful stat to start to look at and unpick a little bit more over the coming months. Just over 1 in 10. So we're looking at kind of online safety here. Tabitha mentioned that, you know, a lot of our young people are spending time on devices, as we all are. You know, we're on one now, but we're starting to understand the concerns around that and see the picture for young people. So just over 1 in 10 of the young people have been sent images or messages that have made them feel uncomfortable, or have been asked to send nude pictures of themselves or join in with sexual conversations. So that's 1 in 10 of those young people. And 11% said that they have daily contact with people that they haven't met in real life. Now this could be, it could involve playing with somebody on a game, online or commenting on a social media post. We're not totally sure yet, but you know, that's certainly something in terms of safeguarding our children and protecting them online. That's certainly something to look at. Next slide, please. Experiencing inequality. This was another theme that came out of the needs analysis, and you know, I'll caveat this with, I think this needs a lot more understanding. As a project team, we want to really delve into some of these, because what we've got here largely a group of stats, but there's a lot more work to understand the causes and the impact there. If I start with that, 1 in 10 are worrying that their family might run out of food because of lack of money or other resources. And that we found was, you know, in itself is concerning, but we find that that's a predictor of their overall life satisfaction. So on average, life satisfaction score for young people we spoke to was 7.6. For those young people who said that they are worried about running out of food, or the family running out of food, they answered 6.1 in comparison. So this, you know, we're definitely seeing that has an impact on their well-being. 2% of young people said that they don't have a bedroom. So, you know, it looks like a poverty issue again coming out of that we need to look at. 14% don't have access to their own laptop or tablet at home for school or college work. They might have to share, or they don't have one at all to use. And given the last, you know, 18 months that we've had with our children, young people in and out of school, it's that's concerning, and something that we should look at moving forward as well. And then finally on here, a fifth of our young people said that they live with somebody with a health or a mental health condition. A fifth, and that will obviously no doubt have a knock-on effect on how they live their lives, and we would like to understand that a little bit more as well. Next slide, please. Future and employment. So there's certainly a shift here, probably understandably given the economic climate of the last 18 months and where we're up to now. But certainly in 2018, in This Is Harrow, when we asked questions about employment, about young people's futures, they almost seemed at that point a sort of a frustration of you know, we want to get into employment, and we need, they asked for work experience, and obviously remains a need there, but there was a feeling of it was about practical support getting into employment. And I think what comes out, and I think you'll feel that as you start to read the report, is this kind of this worry that even, you know, jobs being there, there's obviously a lot of ambition and spark with young people in Harrow. They've got willing, but there's also this kind of shadow, this feeling of, well, only half are optimistic about their future, and we'll come down a little bit more in terms of them worrying about jobs. So half are optimistic about the future. 40% have found somebody who can offer work careers advice that's relevant to them. And a third have carried out work experience of an area that interests them. So, you know, work experience has no doubt has been impacted by the last 18 months. I haven't been able to get out and do this. So it's certainly something to look at. And 39% agreed that they found someone who could offer them careers advice that's relevant to their interests, but 27% disagree. So 27% of the young people don't feel that they have somebody that can offer them that support. And when talking, or when hearing from young people in that free text, when we ask them, what do you typically worry about? And this is looking at the college students, so some 16 to 18 roughly. You know, what are their concerns? And these sort of four things were the common themes coming up. And so stepping into adulthood in terms of leaving home and finding a job, identifying a life goal in terms of career, earning enough money to live, and losing important people in their lives. So you'll see most of their concerns seem to be about, you know, going out into the working world, being able to earn enough money to live. So yeah, that's where we're at. There's lots more data within the report itself. Next slide, please. I think this is my final slide, so you'll get a different face soon. Physical activity, and again, this was a need that was picked up in 2018, but there's been quite a positive sort of shift here, which is great to see. And so on average, children and young people are getting at least an hour of exercise about 5 days a week. It does dip slightly for Key Stage 4 to college. Interestingly, when you sort of delve a little bit deeper, when you ask young people in Key Stage 3 and above, if in their free time they go to a gym or they do exercise or join a club at least once a week, over 50% said they don't. So that may well have been impacted by the pandemic, or it might be that we need to look at perhaps some of the barriers to young people being able to access sport outside of school. And there were some questions around barriers as well. So onto that next bullet point. So when asked about barriers to participating in sports outside of school and college, 18% said there were no suitable spaces or pitches near to them. And 9% said that cost was a factor, it's too expensive to do the exercise or the activity that interested them. And about 6% of young people said that they're not able to go out and do the exercise because they need to look after others in the family. There is a breakdown, really helpfully actually, for anybody sort of designing programs within the report. You can see a breakdown of the activities and the sports that young people are most interested in, and the top 3 coming out certainly were football, rugby and cricket, but you'll get to see that full breakdown. And then finally, and I think this has been flagged as well earlier and certainly needs probably a little bit more exploring, but males seem to be active across significantly more days than females were. And I think that's it from me.
Anne-Marie, are you?
I'll go over to Anne-Marie, sorry. Are you there?
Yes, hello, hi. Okay, so I'll move on now to a brief snapshot of some of the answers that young people gave us. So if I could have thank you. So over 60% of young people in Key Stages 4 and 5, and that's including colleges, do not know how to access local sexual health services in Harrow. Over 40% of Key Stage 4 and 5 and college students have fizzy drinks at least several times a week. And 46% of Key Stage 2 and 40% of Key Stage 3 go to school via car or taxi. We also asked young people whether they agreed with this statement. If someone asked me to do something that I didn't want to do, I would say no. Overall, about 9% of young people disagreed with this, 22% were neutral, and 68% agreed. Now, as you can see, all of these areas, some of them are a little bit shocking, particularly around sexual health services, of young people not knowing how to access them in the borough. But working together in partnership with all our professionals, we're going to be able to advise young people correctly so that they can make, informed, healthy choices. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Can people hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jonathan.
Yeah, so you're probably, this is just so much information, isn't it? That I think, we're all just trying to process it. And we've had 2 weeks sort of in advance of you to on this call to try and get heads around, and there is still so much. I just really wanted to pull out two things that kind of been spoken about already, but have sort of really been occupying my mind for the last couple of days. Kathy, if you can. So one is just what somehow stood out for me was that maybe we do need to think more about college students, because the stats do seem to say that things are different for them. So college students are happier in lots of ways, but they lead unhealthier lives. And coming from public health, that's not something, we're normally killjoys. And in this case, it's, don't get too excited about that. And I think it's correlation rather than causation. But certainly, if you look at this, the numbers here, that 88% say they like college a bit or a lot, against 65% who say the same about school in Key Stage 4 and 5. And more on that later, and a hint as to why that is. But 38% of college students have fast food or a takeaway at least several times a week, whereas for those in school in Key Stage 4 and 5, that number is only 18%. So there's a huge difference there. Obviously, they're a lot older, they're more likely to live on their own, etc. There are, a whole number of reasons why that's the case, but I think it's good to sort of keep bearing that in mind. Smoking too, 10% of college students say they smoke, whereas it's 2% basically for the school age population. And I think Tabitha's already pointed out, 18% of college students say they worry about food, whereas it's only 10% for the rest of the borough. Move on to the next slide. So the other thing is just to look again about life satisfaction. And so firstly, to say life satisfaction isn't mental health, and you can have a mental health issue, diagnosed mental health issue or whatever, but you can have high life satisfaction, and conversely, you can have low life satisfaction and no mental health condition. But when you look at the report that that Kerry and that Tabitha have mentioned, and you look internationally, something is happening with our young people. And also, I should also say, by the way, that obviously, this is an age where, as someone pointed out to me yesterday, life satisfaction and teenager, those two words don't always go together. This is an age when, it should be about they're challenging the status quo, thinking about things in all sorts of ways, but something is going on with our young people. We have the unhappiest in Europe by many measures based on the 2018 data. If you go to the next slide. And in the UK, the same questions that have been asked over this period of time from 2009 until 2018 shows that life satisfaction has been going down across the UK. If you move on to the next slide. And when the Children's Society, who produced the Good Childhood Report, they thought about what the drivers could be, they found there was no evidence, and I think the Hay Harrow survey shows this as well, from what Tabitha was saying, there's no evidence about the link between use of digital technology and life satisfaction. There is some evidence about poverty and life satisfaction, and again, that comes out in the Hay Harrow survey. But there is a very strong connection between fear of failure and life satisfaction. And this is the point that maybe you, who are much closer to working with children and young people on a daily basis, this is what you know already, but this is hit me, very strongly. And I don't know why I didn't sort of understand or see this before. Next slide, please. Because if you look, there we go. So there is, in statistical terms, this is pretty much a straight line. If you know what that young people are saying about their fear of failure, you can almost, with pinpoint accuracy, say what their life satisfaction scores will be. And as you can see, the UK, Great Britain, is there marked in the bottom right-hand corner, we have the lowest life satisfaction, and we have the greatest fear of failure of any country in Europe. And the reasons for this seem to be largely, I mean, translated is the fear of exams and the pressure we put on. And if you look at the word clouds for Key Stage 3, if we go on to the next slide, the biggest word that stands out in terms of what worries Key Stage 3 is school. And if we go to the next slide, and if we look at Key Stage 4 and 5, there it is, exams and future and school. And if you look at college, interestingly, it's slightly different. It's a much more sort of mixed picture. And maybe again, that speaks to like maybe the academic pressure within college is less than within school. And I think this is a kind of, you know, this is the system we're in. The UK's education system is so much about exams in a way that it isn't in other countries, and we can't change the system. But what we can do is maybe all of us, in terms of our response to this survey, is be thinking about this. Because it is, I think, something uncomfortable for us as adults to think about, because when we're responding to a survey like this, I think there's, you know, Tabitha used the word altruistic in another context for the young people, and there is something we want to support people with the issues that they've got. This feels quite uncomfortable to me because I feel somehow, not personally, but part of, there's a collective responsibility for what we as adults are then doing to create a system that is making our young people unhappy. And we can't do anything about that, but we can think collectively about that. And by the way, I don't want to make schools and colleges feel any worse than, you know, they're so often the punch bags for the country about what's going wrong with our young people. And I'm not trying to say that, but I am saying there is something about us all thinking about this as one of the key drivers for our young people being unhappy, particularly in the older age groups. Which leads us on to the next slides about where we do go next. So there is just so much that you will have heard today, and we're all going to spend quite a lot of time in, you know, looking. We're going to get the report out to you in a couple of weeks, hopefully. And we're also going to, Young Harrow Foundation is going to host what's called Power BI, where we put all the raw data in, and then you will be able, hopefully, to cut it, as it were, in whatever way, so you can segment it down and sort of try and make sense of the data yourselves. And we'll also be producing a short report as a general sort of to share, and each school will be getting, I think Kathy said, their own individual report, which, by the way, no one else will see. Nobody will see what individual schools and colleges have responded. We need to keep that discreet to each school. We really want to feedback to the young people who've been so generous, as Carol was saying, in sharing this information with us. So we want to do you said we will responses back to young people. We know that, you know, you're on this call because you care about children and young people, and you will all be going off and thinking about what you can do as individuals and within your organizations, schools, colleges, teams, etc., to respond to the results in the survey. We will also be thinking borough-wide, what borough-wide actions do we need to be undertaking? But also, as I was saying, with this thing about, you know, thinking about some of the topics, we can't do anything about the fact that we live in an exam-driven system, but we can be keeping that in mind. And I think that is equally as important very often as actually doing something. The newly formed Harrow Children and Young People's Integrated Partnership Board, which is chaired by Paul, is going to hold the responses, as it were, at a borough level. We've said that we want to have probably another 6 months of reflection, further research, lots more conversations. We want to hear your feedback. We want to find out where we maybe need to do more delving into the data that we've got, or maybe more focus group work to understand. And some of the questions coming through, you're right, we don't know the answers to all of these things that the questions you're posing, but they're the right questions and we need to spend more time thinking about it. We then want to have a borough-wide practitioner event sometime in the winter, where we're presenting these findings, but also what we all want to do about it. As Carol was saying, we want to repeat the survey in 18 to 24 months time to see what's changed. Hopefully, you know, if we're really pushing on some of these things, we can see a difference. But right now, we really want to have the dialogue. We want, you know, you're already putting questions in the chat, in the Q&A. Please share your thoughts with us, and certainly we'd like to get round to a lot of your teams, etc., and share the thoughts and hear in maybe smaller groups what you think of the findings. But I really want to say a huge thank you. I can't thank Tabitha enough. You know, the work you've done to help us design the questionnaire and then analyze the responses is just phenomenal. So a huge thank you, Tabitha. I know all of us on the team feel the same. And thank you everyone for staying the course and listening to all of this.
Thank you, Jonathan. Do you want to just touch on the next slide, Kathy? So it's time for discussions. Obviously, the team, especially Tabitha and Jonathan, have been answering some of the questions that go along, and if we have time, we might just touch back on some of them just so everyone's aware, but you should be able to see them as participants. If you click on the Q&A and look at the answered questions, you'll be able to see some of those questions. So, but there are some that haven't. So Donna from Ignite has asked some specific ones about what she's picked up around the lack of access to free space and the lack of access to low-cost activities for children and young people. So really from my answers to that, and obviously, Donna, we chat quite a lot, and I'm sure you're aware of my point of view. We are very passionate on this. We are pleased to see an increase in people getting active. And when you see the chart, it's been really interesting to see the kind of things like running has really gone up through COVID, young people enjoying doing activities they might not have done before COVID. But that's why we're partnering with the Harrow School and John Lyons School to try and use some of the facilities locally to get them used more. But also things like I've forgotten what they're called. The athletics centre, they've now got the new 4G pitch going in. That will be open very, very soon. We'll hopefully see a lot of organisations being able to use that. And there's a couple more other opportunities hopefully opening. So on Young Harrow points of view, even though it's great to see some numbers going up, we would totally agree with you, Donna, that we need to see more, and we need to see more accessibility to those services for any young person, not just people with funding. I didn't know if anyone else wanted to say anything. Paul, I know you're on the call. I don't know if you wanted to comment on, you know, as a borough, kind of physical activity and making sure young people have got access to things, or if anyone else on the panel. But Paul, is anything you wanted to say?
So Jonathan did make reference to the Children and Young People's Partnership Board, and I want us to take a holistic approach to this, and actually looking at space and activities across the borough is very important in terms of well-being, and we absolutely agree with that. How we're going to approach it, we'll need to work that through, but we've got a very clear message from our young people, that's for sure. So we want to respond to that, and we will.
Thanks, Paul. I know Alex Dewsnap's in the participants, so not on the panel tonight, but I know he and his team has also been looking at how we can make sure facilities that the council have ownership of can be open and used more readily. So I know that is happening as well. Would anyone else like to answer anything on that specific question of physical space? And one of the things I think there's a discussion to be had as we move forward, and hopefully as we've come out of COVID, I think the partnership between schools and people outside schools has been stronger than ever. And I'm hoping to see things like facilities in schools being able to be used where cost isn't the complete restrictor of making that possible. But let's hope we can see more of that. The other question, so I'll let someone else do this one, but seems that schools and colleges, through their welfare and counselling service, are having to pick up on the cuts, the lack of adequate provision of CAMs, and obviously we're not saying anything about lack of provision as a corporate answer. That was just in this question, and I know obviously Hugh, you've answered quite a lot in that, and I know it was really interesting on a webinar with you yesterday to hear all about the education psychology team and all they're doing. But I don't know if Anne-Marie or Jonathan, did you want to pick up anything on either on that specific question?
Sorry, can you repeat? Sorry, I was distracted by reading some of the other comments at that point. What I sort of half...
The question specifically about it, it could be that there seems to be this new pressure on the welfare and the counselling services that colleges and schools are having to now take on if the pressures are realistic, like this survey's doing. What are your opinions of how do we jointly make sure that young people's health and well-being and mental health are being supported and not just putting pressure on schools and colleges? Anne-Marie, I know you're talking, but you are muted. So I think if you...
I was just thinking about making sure all schools are aware of the online counselling service from COOF, which is sometimes good while they're waiting to be seen by CAMS or Harrow Horizons.
Yes, and we know that's being used well during the pandemic, certainly, and that's you know, open to any young person in the borough.
Great. And I think, yeah, being aware of any of we're actually, I know obviously Hugh, you're not on the panel, but I know over the last kind of 6 months to a year, there's been quite a lot of partnerships again of mental health services coming together. Just so everyone's aware, on Help Harrow, please be aware of that, because two things for that. One is any family in this borough can still have a week's worth of food for the whole family. Just click on Help Harrow and you can apply that either to support them or ask them to do it themselves, and they can then keep requesting that if they are struggling for food. But the other thing on there is a mental health partnership on there, which I know Hugh and many other services are on there, that support for mental health is there. So COOF is one of them. So please be aware that we've got to make sure that people are aware of the services that we're trying to make sure in front of young people.
There is more coming on stream. I mean, the mental health support teams are, you know, starting their work, etc. So it feels like there is starting to be more out there.
I agree. So,
I just think in some ways it's, you know, the need is growing for all sorts of reasons. COVID, obviously, as we've been hearing about today, but generally the figures seem to be all heading in that direction. It's
I agree. So what I'd like to do, if it's okay, because people can look at the questions that have been answered, what we'd like to do is literally spend 1 minute, if you can, click on the chat function and just put there what you feel is either surprised you or challenged you from something that's been said, because we're really interested. Obviously, there's a lot of data that's been sent to you, and this really is still only a drop in the ocean because we've been able to collect so much data this time. So which you will be able to have access to hopefully in the coming months. But what has struck you, what has challenged you from something that's been said? We'll just, if it's okay, just put like a little one-liner or a couple of words in the chat, and it would be nice to just get a bit of a kind of temperature check on what you, as those that are listening tonight, have felt. So click over in the chat and I will wait for those to start coming through and kind of obviously bring some comments to some of them. Percentage of people not having bedrooms, and I think one of the other things that I obviously, it was in the main report, is actually there's a percentage of people that are in a temporary accommodation, which is also a worrying factor. So again, those that can help look at that and drive some thinking around that, I think it's going to be really important to do that. Yes, the percentage of people not feeling safe at home, obviously 2% that always don't feel safe, and up to 10% that at times do not feel safe at home. Again, I think we all have a responsibility of understanding what that looks like. Yeah, the question, the kind of percentage about the teachers, because obviously when we did it in 2018, that was very high. And I think our assumption at the moment is it is this break and this due to COVID, obviously this detachment from what normally is just a daily engagement for a whole day and a relationship building has suddenly been slightly pulled away. And it's going to be really important to figure out how that can be knitted back together. Yeah. The sexual harassment, and we are definitely, there's been a lot of press about this recently, and our stats definitely align with what that press, which obviously many were saying this is, are we just seeing a specific stat and that's been put in the national press, but actually our stats really did correlate with a lot of the kind of alarming figures around kind of harassment. Really interesting. Well, unless I'm just going to quickly check, make sure there was no other questions that just came through in the last minute. No. Thank you so much for the panelists. Please, if you can all turn your Carol, is there anything else you'd like to quickly say? Obviously, Paul was able to reflect on something because of the question that was asked. Just wanted to check, is there anything, Carol, that you would like to just touch base on?
I think, like everybody else, this is all new to me. I've purposely not been pressing Jonathan to give me little insights into it. So I think it's really fascinating stuff. I think it does highlight some of the inequalities that we've got within our society, and there's some sort of pretty shocking stuff there that we need to address, and I think there's the pandemic, I think, has got a lot to do with some of those answers, but some of those answers are not pandemic related. They're long-standing inequalities. And that fear of failure. I think a lot of teenagers, you're looking at exam time and things, you do have that fear of failure. But does this seem to be a bit more extreme than we remember from our own youth? It's given me lots of things to think about.
Absolutely. And I think one of the final thoughts for me is we are hoping that this data is the first steps to us working together as we come out of COVID stronger as a community to help young people, especially those most in need. And I know many people will be using it. And for those that are really struggling to find the funding, we hope you can use this to drive funding into this borough so we can support more. For those that need it to help understand program design as we're coming out of COVID, please use it. But we really want to, when you get the report, you'll see as you read it, this for us over the next 4 months is still only the beginning stages. We really want to work with a lot of you as partners to keep understanding this so that we can have a line in the sand in November that gives us a year as a collective borough to do something about some really key areas. Jonathan, is there any final word from you as we close tonight's webinar?
No, I think, people are saying it, the conversation started. I'm so happy, and that's what this is about. And thank you, Dan, for chairing it and hosting us tonight.
Pleasure. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great night. And obviously we'll get to the report. It will automatically come to you because you signed up to the webinar. Have a great night and we'll see everyone soon. Thank you so much.